Have you ever trusted someone so much, only to have that trust shattered in the most unexpected way? What would you do if the person you loved most betrayed you in the name of reconnecting with an old friend? In today's video, I reveal the heartbreaking truth about my wife's infidelity when she attempted to reconnect with a childhood friend. The conclusion of this story will astound you, so stay tuned and don't miss a minute of this emotional journey. My wife and I met during our senior year of college. We started talking because we liked the same TV shows and anime, and we eventually fell in love. To be honest, it felt so right at the time, and I rarely doubted our relationship. We had a lot of foolish arguments early on, mostly about the guys she was hanging out with, but I was always reassured. Looking back, I think I was gaslighting. However, things were always resolved, which was most likely not the only red flag I ignored. Anyway, we dated for 4 years, got married, and have been married for 3 years. So, we're approaching our 30s. Since we met in college, we've spent our childhoods far apart. I grew up in the United States, but I discovered that before moving here, her family lived in Ecuador until she was about 12. Once she arrived, she grew up in Washington. She would occasionally tell me stories about her childhood in Ecuador, which were quite interesting to someone like me who had never left the country. It was through these stories that I learned about Danny, a very close childhood friend. He had one of those innocent juvenile crushes on her. According to the sound of things, though, she claimed she couldn't remember if she felt the same way about him at the time. She leaned towards them, with little emotion. She and Daniel hadn't communicated much, but he had sent her a friend request on Facebook 2 or 3 years ago. They did some catching up after the friend request, but as far as I know, it was soon reduced to only occasionally reacting to each other's posts on the platform. The mess began when she received a message from Daniel informing her that he was moving to the United States. He had finished school, worked briefly in Ecuador, and was now ready to enter the U.S. job market. Excellent for him. The problem was that my wife seemed to be the only person this guy knew in the United States, and he really wanted them to meet so they could reconnect while also learning the basics of living in this new country. To be honest, I didn't see much wrong with this. They had last seen each other as children. There was little interaction as adults, none of it in person, and she and Daniel appeared to be happily married. His wife would accompany him after all. So the time had come and Daniel flew to the United States. He intended to begin working in California, but his flight plan was to fly directly to Dulles and then drive to California. My wife offered to pay for his road trip, which would be less inconvenient for him. In fact, she did not consult with me before agreeing to pay for him, but he chose to travel to see her. So, while I would have preferred that he bear the brunt of the financial burden, I thought I might have been a jerk back then. Given that this was a South American man about to embark on a new life, it may have been a huge relief to have all of the financial burden lifted off of his shoulders. I drove my wife to meet him at a public park and noticed that Daniel was alone. I knew he went with his wife, so I expected to see her there. After the greetings, I inquired about his wife, who said she had gone straight to California. I felt a little uneasy about it because I had dismissed any concerns about his wife's presence. But it wasn't impossible that she wouldn't want to spend the entire day in Washington, so I gave it up. Because they were likely to spend the entire day reminiscing in Spanish and I didn't want to be a third wheel, I left. They would have the day to themselves. She'd show him around Washington, and I'd pick them up when they were ready to end their day. Again, this was a childhood friend she hadn't seen in years, so while I was a little jealous that she was spending the entire day with another man, I wasn't concerned about the risk. It did not appear likely that anything would happen between them so abruptly and without warning. Several hours later, I received a message from my wife stating that it was fine if I picked her up at any time from now on. Then on. She sent me the address, which was the bar we went to the most. Again, I felt a little envious, but it's a great place to drink and talk, so it made sense. Everything would be fine as long as nobody drank too much. About 15 minutes after she sent the message, I left the house and went to the bar she was at. When I arrived, I saw her and Daniel sitting in their usual spot, laughing loudly. I approached them and my wife smiled as she saw me, but the laughter faded. The two of them didn't appear to be eager to leave, but I suppose my presence was a bad omen, bringing their wonderful night to an end. My wife said goodbye to Daniel and hugged him. I shook his hand and we all exited the bar together. My wife called an Uber to take him home, and we returned to our home. "So, how was your day with Daniel?" was the first thing I said as I removed my coat upon entering the house. She appeared to be overjoyed to recount everything that had happened, and I was once again jealous. But don't you think it makes sense to be happy to reconnect with someone you haven't seen in a long time? I attributed it to my insecurity and listened to her. She went on and on about how they walked through the park and talked, how she took him to a museum, how they stopped for a quick bite to eat, and how they ended up at the bar. I had an odd feeling near the end of her story, though, because she had a lot of details to share about what they talked about in all the other places, but they didn't seem to talk about much other than the sports game that was on at the bar, at least according to how she told the story. I didn't ask, though, because I dislike appearing overly suspicious and insecure, and I had nothing solid to be concerned about. The rest of the night went well, and I got over the nagging feeling I had. The next morning, literally seconds before I left the house for work, my wife mentioned that she might see Daniel again. At that point, I had much more than a nagging feeling. We had a conversation that went something like this. "What? Isn't he supposed to be heading to California today? Do you want to see him before he heads to the bus station or what? He'll push his departure back by a day, just a day. He'll go tomorrow, but there's so much to talk about and I don't know the next time I'll see him. When did you find out he was staying an extra day? I mean, we talked about it yesterday at the bar, but nothing was confirmed yet. Something seemed wrong. Daniel wasn't a bad-looking guy. If anything, I think I look better." So I began to wonder if she felt a spark for him that didn't exist when they were kids. I must have stood there for quite some time without saying anything because she said, "Babe," to get my attention, and all I said in response was, "Okay." I needed to get to work, so I turned and left right away. She must have sensed something was wrong because, as I walked through the doorway, she said, "I have to show up at work so I won't spend much time with him, baby." I didn't respond. Let's jump ahead to when I was at work. Honestly, I was having trouble concentrating because I had a bad feeling about my wife and Daniel. To be honest, I struggle with insecurity at times, so I had to constantly ask myself if I was overthinking things. I tried to keep my mind under control, but failed, so I asked to leave work early. My boss adores me, so it was not difficult, especially since it was such an unusual request for me. I was given permission, so I went. I began to feel insane at this point, especially because I did something I'm not proud to admit, but it was worthwhile. I've always been good at thinking things through, so I parked my car in a shopping mall. After that, I took Uber to a Hertz location and rented a basic vehicle. I drove it to the hotel my wife mentioned Daniel was staying at, and I found a parking spot with a good view of the hotel's entrance. In case you were wondering, I couldn't drive my own car because my wife might have recognized it. Again, I felt insane and stupid throughout this because I wasn't even sure she was at the hotel. If she were, my wife would rather stay in a hotel room with another man alone, even if it was just to talk, because such situations breed distrust. Putting yourself in such situations leads to trust issues. I'm not kidding when I say I sat in my car for 4 hours straight. I was hungry and needed to pee, but I was worried that if I left, I'd miss what I was hoping or not hoping to see. But almost as soon as it started, my wife and Daniel were there. A familiar figure emerges from the hotel. It was my wife and Daniel. I remember trying to make excuses for her at the time. They were on their way. Perhaps she wasn't in his room, but rather in the lounge, restaurant, or bar. They could have been in the lounge, restaurant, or bar. But the fact that she was there so late in the day made me nervous because she had said she wasn't going to spend much time. In that moment, I was torn between believing her and doubting her. Well, the fight lasted until I noticed a car pull up in front of the entrance. This was an Uber. I assumed they both approached the door and he opened it for her. I watched them kiss before she got into the car. The kiss lasted for about 10 seconds. I'm still not sure how I was able to regain clarity of thought for a brief moment, but I did manage to record a video of the last 3 seconds of the kiss. Then she got in the car. He closed the door, and her car drove away. I sat there in the rental car, unable to process any further thoughts. My brain felt frozen. I think I sat there for an extra hour before returning the rental. I did not return home that night. I told her I needed to work late and would spend the night at the office. She sounded disappointed, but she wasn't concerned because this was something I did frequently. I had planned to sleep in a hotel, but then I realized something. My wife knew I wasn't coming home, and if she hadn't been expected at home, she wouldn't have cut her night with Daniel short. I was still going to sleep in a hotel, but this time it would be the same one Daniel was staying at. I just had a strong suspicion she'd go back to the hotel to spend the night with him and then try to leave in the early hours of the morning before I could possibly return. I returned right away, this time in my car, and booked a room. Luckily, they weren't completely booked. It was dark, so I went into the hotel lobby and sat in the most discreet spot I could find with a view of the door. I sat in the most inconspicuous spot I could find that provided a view of the door. Though it was a large lounge, I wasn't exactly hidden. I had arrived at the hotel only 35 minutes after calling her, so I hoped I had arrived before her, assuming she was even coming. Almost as soon as the thought crossed my mind, who walks in? She was wearing a particular red dress, and I had never been too shy to tell her how much I admired it. I liked it. I'll admit that all I wanted to do was gather evidence that she was present and confront her with it later, but that wasn't on my mind at the time. I stood up and rushed over to her before she could make it up the stairs, tapping her on the shoulder to get her to turn around. The shock on her face was something I'd never forget. There were a few seconds of complete silence between us, and I could see her jaw moving as if she wanted to say something, but she didn't have anything intelligent to say. "What are you doing here?" I asked through clenched teeth, and she could tell I was angry. "You're here to see Daniel, aren't you?" She managed to tell me through a ridiculous amount of stuttering that yes, she was there to meet Daniel, but she wasn't going to stay long in his hotel room. They planned to go out so she could take him to a party or event. I asked her why I didn't know about this supposed party, and she only said, "It must have slipped my mind. I wasn't planning to go before." I could see her hands trembling, but she tried to keep them steady against her body. "But what are you doing here?" "I'll show you," I said, pulling out my phone and playing a brief video of her and Daniel kissing in front of the hotel. Now, fellas, I've never hit a woman and never will, but when her only response to the video was, "You were spying on me?" I'll admit, I felt compelled to. Because of this, I only told her, "Don't come home tonight," before turning to walk away. She tried to grab my arm and say some stupid words to entice me, but I was afraid of what I would do if she said something really stupid in her defense, so I left. I returned home, and in the 3 days since, she has not returned home. I know she's fine because her sister, who lives across town, inquired about what was wrong. My wife was apparently too ashamed to admit anything, so I didn't tell her anything. So now I really need advice. I need to hit her where it hurts because she cannot keep playing me like this. I'll read your comments. It's been extremely difficult for me to figure out what to do in the midst of such intense emotions, but I've decided to proceed with a divorce as the first step, as almost all marriages are the ultimate trust exercise. Further with my wife, but I'm not sure how yet. I also have some plans for Daniel, but I'll keep them under wraps for the time being. I hope to have an update for you all in a few weeks, and hopefully not longer. Marriage is the ultimate exercise in trust. It's similar to a game of Monopoly, but instead of passing go and collecting $200, you're avoiding infidelity accusations and collecting emotional baggage. And Daniel is just the icing on the cake, isn't he? You decided to trash your marriage, a throwback to the past. Who knew that innocent childhood infatuations could resurface like a bad penny? Now, on to the revenge plot. While some may suggest taking the high road, where is the fun in that? Nothing says revenge served cold like a divorce settlement that leaves her wondering if Daniel's charm was worth it. It sounds like it's about time your wife's sister knew who she is related to. Update. Hello, everyone. I'm glad the first step for me was divorce. I have a friend from college who is now a successful divorce lawyer, and he was the first person I called after I'd made up my mind. Papers have been filed, she has been served, and while we haven't reached a solid agreement on anything, we don't have children, and our incomes aren't far apart. so I'm unlikely to be paying much, if any, alimony. I can live with being apart from her. We don't own a home and don't have children yet, so we won't have to fight over those issues. I'll leave her with the apartment because the rent was so high, but she adored the view so much that I couldn't care less. Oh, she called me the other day, crying and asking if she could come to the house and talk about things with me. I told her she could say whatever she wanted over the phone, but she just kept crying. After that, his wife was easy to find, and all I had to do was tell her everything I knew about her husband's brief detour on their trip to America. Okay, I looked back at what she had done, and it was like smelling salts to me. It brought me right back to my senses. I knew Daniel's name and was able to find him online fairly easily. His wife was easy to find after that, and all I had to do was tell her everything I knew about her husband's brief detour on their trip to America. I had a video that helped seal the deal. She was furious, but it was simple for me. I just hope she doesn't backtrack, given how reliant she became on him in America. She talks a lot and she's a beautiful woman. I'm not saying I intend to do anything, but it would be poetic justice for both of us. We'll see how that progresses. Anyway, she's going to leave his buttocks, which is precisely what I wanted. I just hope she doesn't backtrack as she came to America relying on him. I had to be much more heartless to get at my wife. First, I formed a group of her closest family and friends and informed them all, including her sister, who continued to refuse to tell me what had happened. Fortunately, I met someone who works in the same building as her, but on a different floor, chose to openly doubt me. Next, I didn't have a way to make her lose her job, but I did think I could make her work environment more uncomfortable. This part was difficult because I didn't want to deal with the defamation issue, even though it was true. Fortunately, I knew someone who worked in the same building as her but on a different floor. So I approached him and explained how I had separated from my wife. I asked if he knew anyone on my wife's floor, and he said he did. All I asked was that he plant a seed in that person's ear, and hopefully the rest will spread like gossip. I told him I'd owe him lunch if he did it correctly. You should have seen the smile on my face when my wife called, fuming and asking why I would tell her employer about what had happened. I told her I had no idea what she was talking about. After all, I didn't know anyone in her office. She knew that was true, but she kept saying, "You must have told someone. Somehow you must have." I could hear her fighting back tears as she yelled at me, but I only enjoyed it because she did. She also screamed about how I told everyone close to her about what she had done, but I told her she should be grateful I hadn't sent them the video as well. She promised to make the acceptance hell. There are better things in store for me. I should have waited until everything was settled before taking my revenge, but I guess I was too eager to get back at her. Regardless, I'm relieved to be free of her. There's no point in staying with cheaters. I would rather be single than be with someone who is unfaithful. And if these are the cards that the universe has dealt me, I will accept them. There are better things ahead of me. So thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something from my story. It wasn't fun, but I'm still young, and I'll do my best never to waste my time with a woman like her. There's nothing like the sweet scent of vengeance in the morning, right? Divorce papers were filed, the wife was served, and a new chapter of freedom was about to begin. Creating a group chat to spill the beans to her nearest and dearest. That's next-level petty genius right there. And are you using your inside man at her workplace to sow seeds of discontent? Well done, OP. Planting doubt in workplace gossip is a stroke of diabolic genius. Why waste time on someone who can't be faithful when there's a whole world out there looking for a revenge-seeking bachelor like you? Cheers to better times ahead. Ahead! So that's the story. Life's betrayals can push us to the brink, but they can also teach us the importance of self-respect and moving forward. It's not about vengeance. It's about knowing when to let go and prioritizing your own happiness. This journey was not easy, but it was an essential step toward a brighter future. Thank you for tuning in, and remember to always know your worth and never accept less than you deserve. Until next time. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to my channel. I want to have 1,000 subscribers, but first I need to reach the 100 subscriber mark. Subscribers, help me reach my goal by clicking the subscribe button. Your support means everything to me.